Hello everyone, welcome back to the Sharmit podcast. Today I am thrilled to welcome a very special guest, Brecht De Ruyte. Brecht is a renowned front-end developer, Google developer expert, and a passionate advocate for accessibility, user experience, and design. Brecht's career journey is marked by a self-taught foundation, continuous learning, and adapting to the evolving landscape of front-end development. Today, we are going to dive into his inspiring journey. We will also touch on his thoughts about the GDE program or a Google Developer Expert program and how it empowers the developer community. But before we got started, I would like to thank Brechet for joining us today in this episode. And now I request you to please initiate the discussion by telling us something about yourself.
Oh, well, first of all, a lot of flattering words from you. Thank you so much for this. Um, yeah, a bit about myself. Well, as you said before, my name is Brecht. I'm from Belgium and I'm a front end developer. I've been doing this for about, I don't know, 15 years, might have lost a few years out there. But yeah, still always a passion for UX and accessibility and just CSS. I'm a real CSS nerd, love CSS. So yeah, that's a bit about me personally. Yeah, thank you for
Okay,
having me.
yeah, it's my pleasure. Okay. All right. So, Bracken, I want to discuss a bit more about your journey, especially into the front end development. So, could you please tell us a bit more in a detailed way, like how your journey started with the front end development, and how you become a self-taught leader in this industry?
Yeah, to be completely honest, I just was a bad student, man. I was bad. I had more pleasure in going to pubs than actually staying behind the books. So then I started doing a whole bunch of factory work, and I've worked in a lot of different factories, interims. And then I was like, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. I want to do something different. And I already had a bit of basic knowledge about creating websites. Of course, we're talking a long time ago, so it was usually still in HTML tables.
Yeah.
Even yeah, the frame sets were still a thing, if I remember correctly. So I had to brush up those skills. So I was working early shifts and doing a bit of self studying in the afternoon, and the other way around, depending on my shift. And then finally, a person gave me a chance, and then it just kept rolling from there. And yeah, to be honest, it's actually a cool thing, right? In our industry, that people can be self-taught and
Right.
still be able to learn the craft and go forward and learn new stuff. I mean, it's all about that one person giving you a chance, and when you start rolling, you can just keep studying and move forward. So yeah, that's kind of how that self-taught part came from.
Okay. All right. So, Bracket, as we see towards the front end development, and you also mentioned it's quite oftenly that the front end developer role has shifted significantly throughout the time, from like simple HTML and CSS to the complex architectures. So, what are the biggest changes that you have witnessed throughout your journey? That yes, these are the things that significantly change in terms of front end development.
Yeah, so when I started out, I actually was more of a designer who knew a bit of HTML and CSS. That's kind of how I started.
Mhm.
It used to be like this designer thing to also be good at HTML and CSS. And then shortly after, it kind of became its own role. Then you had your PHP developer and your front end developer would usually write more HTML and CSS. And now we're actually into this whole JavaScript landscape, right? With a bunch of
Yeah.
React or Vue, or there's so much JavaScript right now, which has changed the front end role even more significantly. I think a lot of people actually are specialized in JavaScript more than they are in CSS. I could be mistaken in that, but I think a lot of people are really JavaScript savvy. Um, to I'm not sure that this will stay that way. I do see, I mean, that's kind of the thing. If you're doing this for a long time, you do see things shifting around a lot. You
Okay.
see it right now with AI, which is also a big thing in our industry right now,
Right.
and I'm sure it will be an everyday thing in our lives. I'm pretty sure about that.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's also maybe a bit overhyped. Maybe. I do think it's going to be part of our regular workflow, but now everybody wants to be an AI engineer. But we will probably still need those JavaScript engineers, and we'll probably still need those UX people. I mean, those roles are there to stay. Um, so yeah, it keeps shifting a lot. And one thing that I do also want to mention that I think about just now is that um, we were really going all in on all the JavaScript frameworks for a long
Mm-hmm.
time, and even recently, I do sense that there are more people also getting interested in web components again, because we
Okay.
now have this big saturated market of different JavaScript frameworks, and some agencies have done all of them at a certain point. So
Mm-hmm.
then they want to have a component that works in all those ecosystems together. So people are starting to look at web components once again, which is, I think, a very interesting evolution as well. Yeah.
Okay. So, Bracket, like if we look towards your journey, so far journey, so we notice that accessibility, user experience, and design are one of your cornerstones for your focus, right? So, why do you think like these pillars are often overlooked in modern development nowadays?
Yeah. So I kind of already pictured it a bit. Like we have a lot of pure JavaScript or really big JavaScript developers who cannot really follow along with everything new happening in CSS, for example. I think that
Yeah.
CSS is currently the fastest growing language on the web. There's so much new CSS. It's crazy if you see how many new stuff that's coming out each month. Um, and it's hard to keep track on all of those things. So I do believe that specialization is still a very big part of it, maybe even more so than it used to be, especially in the last few years. Because now we have a whole bunch of people who are very good at their jobs and very good at JavaScript stuff,
Right.
but they don't really have that big CSS background anymore. So I do believe there's still a lot of room for specialization. For accessibility, the same thing. A lot of laws are being enforced right now for accessibility in Europe as well. So yeah, a big sector in the accessibility world is really gaining a lot of more popularity as it should. And yeah, that's something I can only applaud. Um, One thing that I also believe, and that's maybe about the AI picture, is I can now write something, an app, for example, and I can use AI, and it's perfectly capable of following my logic. Might not always be the best code, of course,
Correct.
but it will be able to follow my logic, and I will be able to get it done in the end. But when we're talking about AI and in combination with UX or design,
Mm-hmm.
that's a completely different question, because UX and design is not logic; it's human emotion. Um, it's about feeling as well as just pure logic.
Correct.
And I think AI can really mimic emotion and feeling, but it doesn't have those things.
Right.
And that's also one of those reasons why I think that UX will be so much more important, because now we see these whole AI tools where people are creating a second version of Clippy for Word. And I don't think that people want Clippy for Word again. I think people want something designed and something fun to play around with. So I do believe in AI integration is going to be a big part of our world. But I do also believe that all the user experience and all the accessibility behind it is going to be a very big part. And those that get that part right,
Right.
they might be onto something special.
Okay. So, like now we got the point that yes, these are the three things that really played a vital role in the development, right? So, how do you ensure that they remain central in your work? Like, what any is there any specific strategies that you follow to make sure that yes, you are taking care of all these three aspects?
Oh, that's a hard question. I do, but of course, I usually come from the UX standpoint. So that's
Mm-hmm.
mostly my starting point. For some people,
Yeah.
that's not the case. Um, so there's different environments that I'm working on as well. So sometimes I'll probably just really work on everything getting accessible. I believe it's about order. So you have HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That's kind of the order that you should think. That's what I believe in.
Mm-hmm.
If you have your foundation wrong, which is your HTML, there's no way you're going to be able to create something accessible. Because if you already have great HTML, well, people might not agree with this, but I think about 80% of your platform will already be accessible. I mean, good
Yeah.
HTML is the foundation of accessibility. Let's keep it at that. The percentage is something I just said. But the same thing goes for CSS. But then when we start to really do all those fancy things with JavaScript, then it can get a bit dangerous when we're talking about accessibility. So I always start from my foundation and work upwards. Might be a bit of an old school thing to do, but yeah, that's kind of because I still see the web that way, in that order.
Okay. All right. Okay. So, like as we can see that you have extensively worked on the frameworks like React and Symfony, right? So, what do you think? Like, what are the strength and weakness of these two particular framework, whether it's a React or Symfony? Like, what are their strength as well as weaknesses in your perspective? Like, how you differentiate these two technologies?
Yeah. So I really don't have a preference between the two. Let me start off with that. I do think, like, for sometimes in Symfony or Twig, I still get a better overview of my HTML, which, as I
Mm-hmm.
said before, helps for getting the accessibility right and getting my foundation right. I think in React, if we're cutting things in a whole bunch of components, sometimes translation of my complete HTML document gets a bit lost. At least that's how I feel it. But I do think like React has a lot of benefits as well. If you look at, for example, in combination with things such as Storybook, which
Mm-hmm.
works very beautifully together. Documenting is so much easier.
Right.
There's so many. Yeah, it can be fast, but it can also get very dangerous in React because it can get complicated really fast. It's kind of the if you keep it simple, it's such a powerful tool. But when it gets complicated and things go wrong, it can go very wrong. So something like that.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, the only thing that I don't always like about React is that it sometimes gets a bit too distant from how the web platform works for me personally. I think some JavaScript frameworks, if I look at their documentation, do it a little bit better. But I do think for React it is getting a bit better. That's just my feeling. The only thing that I really don't like about React is people that do a lot of overly typing in it. Like there's people you can write some TypeScript, but there are people who overly type it. But maybe that's the difference between I don't know a UX minded front ender and some real JavaScript engineer front ender. I mean, who am I to judge? Of course. Um, but that's kind of how I feel that.
Okay. All right. So moving ahead, I would like to talk a bit more about the SSR or SSG because you have extensively worked on these two technologies, which is server-side rendering and a static side generation. So how do you like decide to use these techniques? Like, is there any particular parameter that you utilize or that you consider while selecting both these techniques?
Hmm. So at our company, we usually most of the things we are creating are server side rendered.
Okay.
But I'm also a strong believer in static site generator. My own blog, for example, is built in Astro.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of Astro. I think it's a fantastic framework. I'd love to work a lot more with it. Um, so especially for content websites, if you, for example, look in combination with something such as a Storyblock or some other headless CMS system,
Mm-hmm.
then I think that static site generation is really the way to go. I mean, it's so performant, it's so fast, and you have so much control. And that's the thing that I like to have when creating web apps in general, is I like to have a bit of control. There's a lot of things web related, as I said before, like you lose track in your components, you can't get a clear view anymore in your HTML. And with static
Yes.
site generation, once again, you can really get a nice full picture from all of these little components building together in an actual HTML file. And I think that works really, really well. But I mean, that's static site generation will only get you this far. Of course, when you were talking about things such as a web shop or something, of course, you should go for something server side rendered, something like car manufacturers' platforms where you can configure cars and things like that. Yeah, of course, you will need some server side generation for those experiences to be fast and snappy. Yeah, I mean, I like both of those technologies. Personally, I love a good content website from time to time, so I love static site generation. But that's just me. It's something because a personal thought about that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, what you think as an expert? Like there are, because we all know that every technology has some pitfalls, right? So, what are some of the common performance pitfalls you have witnessed in front end development, and like how you would address them? Those kind of pitfalls or scenarios.
Mm. So performance-wise, a lot of things that happen is that people just get their foundations wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I have had the pleasure of meeting fantastic performance engineers while I was traveling as well. To name one person, Harry Roberts, who is a brilliant mind when it comes to web performance. He knows far more about it than I do. But I had a conversation with him, and we kind of already agreed that a lot of things are sometimes just the foundation that people get wrong. And you're never going to get your platform performant if you're not thinking about responsive images, or if you are
Yeah.
using very complicated selectors. Um, some people just load in an instant video that is 3 megabytes, and then they wonder why their performance is wrong. I mean, yeah, you have your answer right there. Uh, so many things you can do, preloading fonts. Already from a front end perspective, for example, so many stuff you can do. Writing CSS, small CSS, every little bit helps, every byte, every kilobyte. And that's kind of the problem we also have with the whole JavaScript ecosystem now, is that we don't write as much by hand anymore as we used to. So we just keep adding libraries and libraries of JavaScript in our code base.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, our code base is getting a lot heavier, a lot
Yes.
less performant. Um, and I'm always think like, do I really need a library for this? Can't I solve this? That's like a hot tip right there. Don't just install it because it's easy. Maybe you just don't need it. And also think about, yeah, what you're serving to people. How many kilobytes are people actually drawing inside of their devices? Think about your images. Think about your fonts. Think about your selectors in CSS, which can also cause some performance issues. So yeah, think about everything you serve. And if you just keep those things in mind, I mean, there's always going to be pitfalls in performance, but if you get your
Yes.
foundations right, yeah, you're pretty good to go.
Okay. So let's talk a bit more about your expertise as a Google developer expert, because as a GD also you are consistently contributing for this IT industry. So I just want to ask you, like, I'm pretty much sure that you have had a great opportunity to collaborate with other developers worldwide as a GD, right? So
Mm.
what is that one collaboration or project that stands out to you? Any particular project that you think that yes, this is something as a collaboration or a project which is very close to your heart?
Yeah, so not necessarily as a GD, but I do a lot of collaboration with OpenUI.
Okay.
I think OpenUI is a W3C community group, and we write explainers for things such as the popover API or the customizable select. Invokers is also a big part of it, and these are things are now coming to HTML. Like for example, we have the popover API already in HTML now. which I think is fantastic work. I do see my contribution as something small. I usually just create a whole bunch of demos and I let people know if something breaks. I mean, all this stuff is still experimental, well, some of
Yeah.
it. So it's good to test early, to find bugs. It really helps, and I can only tell other developers like do the same thing, because when those things are still experimental and you're using something like Chrome Canary, for example,
Mhm.
then that's the moment that you can spot those bugs or things that you don't like. From the moment it gets released in a browser that is stable, you're too late, because you cannot undo something that is in a stable browser. You cannot break the web. If something is there, it's there to stay. So the OpenUI stuff is really interesting, like giving me the ability to style and extend built-in web UI controls. A really fantastic initiative, and I love those W3C groups. Another one that I'm doing is the CSS levels, CSS Next working group.
Mhm.
One thing that came from there was the new CSS logo, which is well overdue. We're finally getting rid of that number 3 badge, finally a new fresh logo for CSS.
Okay.
So it's kind of getting a bit of traction. Happy to see that. And we're also working on those new levels because it's kind of time that we stop talking about CSS tree, because we're well beyond something like a tree. We're so much further now.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, moving ahead, I also want to touch a very important phase of your life, which is writing opportunity, because you have got an opportunity with Smashing Magazine. So, could you please tell a bit more about that, like how you got this guest writing opportunity with this magazine, and like what was that experience for you?
Yeah, so I'm from Belgium, so I'm not a native English speaker as well. And I was writing
Mhm.
on my own blog, utilityband.com, for quite a long time.
Okay.
And I knew that Smashing Magazine works with a review process where somebody checks what you've written and makes some improvements. And I thought this is actually really interesting. Instead of just relying on tools such as Grammarly, I could actually get some real input and some really feedback from a person. So I just signed up. So they have this little contact form. I contacted them like, hey, can I write for you? I have an idea of an article, and they said yes. And I got my first reviewer, which was a fantastic experience to do all these things. So yeah, that was very nice to have. And that's kind of the reason why I'm still doing it, for the review process and learning a lot of it. It's not necessarily just for traction. I mean, it does help. Let's not lie about it. I mean, Smashing
Mhm.
Magazine is read by a lot of people. Um, but yeah, the review process, I really enjoy that so much. Like just learning and sometimes like just people saying like use stronger language, like those little nuances that are really interesting to learn about. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So let's take the last question. Although, like, there are many things that we can discuss here on web development, front end development, right? But I just because of the limitation of time, I would like to ask my last question, and it is related to the person who have helped you in throughout your journey. So, bracket, like, who have been the most influential people in your career journey? Maybe your mentors, colleagues, friends, in fact, a family member. So, like, who were those person?
Yeah. So the backbone for all these things, of course, my family. I mean, I couldn't do that without them. So the biggest motivator always. Besides that, I mean, there's so many people that I look up to still today, and so many people who helped me. Like all the guys at OpenUI, as I said before. I mean, so many interesting people like that. People like Keith
Right.
Circle or Luke Warlow, or Joey, Ferry, Greg Rithford. Like so many brilliant minds in there. Then also the Google DevRel team for CSS and UI. I mean, Adam Margal, Bramis, of course, who's from Belgium as well, and Yuna. Great inspirations, absolutely. And yeah, people I've just worked with, like Jeff Graham, who helped me review a few articles in Smashing Magazine. I mean, I could give you like a list of probably 50 to 60 people that influence me and that I look up to. I always believe that there's so much more to learn. My colleagues at IO, like for example, Dave Bitter, who taught me simple things such as being proud of my work and just because I'm usually like, yeah, I just did this thing. It's like, no, be proud about this. It's important that you're proud about the things you do. Um, and also my service line director, who's also been a great help already for me and giving me the chance to speak at other places. Yeah, it's yeah, so many people that influence me, so many people I look up to. It's amazing world to be in, the web development world.
Okay. All right. So, Bracket, just before winding up this session, I just want to touch one more thing because it would be very beneficial for those like who wanted to start their career into front-end development. So, what one piece of advice would you like to give all those folks who wanted to start their career as a front-end developer? Like, what are those key technologies or key uh, methodology they can utilize in order to learn something about the new about this front end development?
Yes. So, still in this current landscape, I mean, learn a JavaScript framework such as React or Vue. I think
Okay.
that's probably that's going to get you the job.
Hmm.
But what I would suggest is learn your foundations really well. Learn your
Okay.
HTML really well. Learn CSS, but especially HTML, because I do notice a lot of people getting that wrong. And learning good HTML can really help you from being
Right.
a developer to being a very good developer. Like, foundation is so important. Don't forget what you serve to people in the browser, which is HTML, CSS, and JS.
Correct. Yeah, I totally agree here because sometime like if someone is going to start their career in web development, they think that HTML and CSS is very basic thing. Yes, it is basic, but again, it is very important. If you don't know about the basic stuff regarding the HTML and CSS, then it would be a bit difficult for you to take over other advanced things. So it's always
Yeah,
better to
absolutely.
clear the foundation first.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you so much, Prakat, for joining us today in this episode and for sharing
My
your
pleasure.
expertise with all of us. It was really very nice talking to you, and I hope it was very smooth discussion for you as well. So thank you once again.
Pleasure is all mine. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Have a good day.